Last week we discussed the question of why does God take life? Why does God kill? And I did suggest that this week we would continue to look to try to gain a little more insight into the subject. I know that in our studies we try to focus on the positive things. And I believe that this is how it should always be. We are not blessed or uplifted by focusing on negatives. But I believe that understanding the truth about God's character is very important. It's the most important doctrine of all. It's the most important. And the brethren who say God does not kill, what I like about their approach is that they also focus on the character of God. They also emphasize that God is a God of love. They also emphasize that God means well. God has goodwill towards everybody that He created. But as I said, they have distorted God's character in that they have suggested that God is so good, or that goodness means God's goodness and God's love means He can never take life. And I believe that the whole controversy on this issue is not a controversy over whether or not God is love. No, God is love. We don't have any question about that. What is really in contention is the question of how does true love operate? That is the question. What is the nature of true love? Can you love somebody and still take the life of that person? I mean, whenever this discussion comes up, these brethren will say, if you think that you can love somebody and still take the person's life, then what you're doing, you're supporting euthanasia. All of us know what is euthanasia. It's when somebody gets old or they get very sick and they think it's not worth living and they ask a doctor to help them to die. And you know this is illegal in most countries. I think it's legal now in Holland, but it's illegal in most places. If a doctor does that, he will be charged with manslaughter or murder because it's illegal. Because most of us believe it is immoral for you to take the life of a person, even if the person wants to die. And so they say, if you suggest that God does this, God takes life because it is for the good of the person, then you are saying that we also are justified in doing the same thing. But I believe that this is a faulty perspective because the thing is, you and I can help somebody to die. You and I can take somebody's life. And we don't know the purpose God has for that person. We don't know if that person who may not be a Christian may one day become a Christian. We don't know if the person is a Christian and God might have some other purpose for his life. You taking that person's life, you are taking the prerogative of God in your hands. The fact that God does something is not an indication that you are qualified to do it. You don't know, you hardly know anything. We hardly know anything. God knows everything. This is another argument that these brethren will use. They will say, the commandment says, thou shalt not kill. It's commandment number 6, I believe. Thou shalt not kill. God says it plainly. How can God command something when He commands you not to do it? And they say the 10 commandments are a transcript of God's character. They are a description of the way God is. So when God says, thou shalt not kill, it is because He cannot kill. This is their reasoning. But again, it's faulty reasoning because I tell my child, don't climb the ladder. As a matter of fact, my grandson likes to climb. He comes into my office and he finds out where everything is and he wants to climb up on these shelves that you see behind me, the bookshelves, and he wants to get up to the top shelf. And I'm usually a little bit concerned because if he falls, he's going to hurt himself and there's not a lot of room for him to maneuver. So say, kid, don't go up there. Or I keep an eye on him. And the fact that I say this to him, it does not mean that I can't do it. I will do it. I will do things. He wants to use my power tools, my saw. I won't let him use it. He's nearly 8 years old. He's 8 years old. He's not capable of understanding the way to handle the saw in a safe way. So I don't want him to use it when I'm not there monitoring what he's doing. This does not mean that I don't do it. So the argument that says if you forbid something, it's because it's contrary to your nature, that's kind of a foolish, that's an unreasonable argument. If God says you are not to kill, it does not mean that God cannot kill. It simply means that you don't have the knowledge to make those kinds of decisions. God sees everything, so he's capable of doing it. It doesn't mean that you have that same kind of knowledge and that same kind of information. And on the opposite side of that same argument, the opposite side of that same argument, go to Exodus 21. Read chapter 21, chapter 22, and you will see over and over where God says specifically that the Israelites were to kill certain kinds of people. Very clearly, he says that if a man curses his father or mother, he must be put to death. God said it. He says if a person commits adultery, he's to be put to death. He says if somebody breaks the Sabbath, he's to be put to death. If somebody is a homosexual, he's to be put to death. There are more than a dozen cases, more dozen kinds of behavior that God said the person should be put to death. Now we might ask, why did God say this? That's a very good question, and there's a very good answer. But at the same time, what we should not say is that God never said it. The same God who says, "Thou shalt not kill," is the same God who says in the very next breath, in chapter 20, the Ten Commandments, God says, "Thou shalt not kill." In chapter 21, God says, "Thou shalt kill, thou shalt kill, thou shalt kill." So it emphasizes the point. When God says, "Don't do something," he's not saying you and I are on the same level. I tell you not to do it, therefore I cannot do it. Nonsense. He also says you must kill, but he specifies now the conditions under which it can happen. He's not saying don't kill, he's saying I want to control the circumstances under which you do this thing. And I'm going to tell you clearly, these are the circumstances. As a matter of fact, those who have a better grasp of the Hebrew language, they say that the real meaning of that commandment, "Thou shalt not kill," is "Thou shalt do no murder." Thou shalt do no murder. So that gives it a completely different spin. God is not saying it is immoral to take life under any circumstance. What he's saying, it is immoral to take life if you murder the person. And murder means that you unjustly, unfairly, without a legal reason, without a just reason, you take somebody's life. This is murder. But under certain circumstances, God gives the authorities, or God gave the authorities the right to put somebody to death. So what I'm saying is, it's a complex question. Even today, we can look at the question, under what circumstances would you put a person to death? And that is not the point I'm making. The point I'm making is that it is clear that when God says, "Thou shalt not kill," he's not saying this is a rule that is set in stone and it must never be broken under any circumstance, because he himself established certain circumstances under which he said it was correct, it was acceptable, it was even necessary to remove the life of a person. What we can see, I suppose, if you want to get the basic understanding, here's how what I would say. God's purpose is to save as many people as possible. There are certain situations in which, in order to save 10 people, one person might need to die. I am not capable of making that decision because I don't know the future. But if in order to save 10 people, one person has to die, and there's no other way, what would you do? What should you do? You make 10 person die and one person live, or you make 11 people die. If you're a practical person, if you're a strong person, you do what has to be done, even if it grieves your heart. The problem with sin is that from the moment Lucifer introduced sin in the universe, it was a sentence of disaster. It was a death sentence. From that moment, God knew that a lot of lives would be lost that did not have to be lost. But there are certain things that happen. You You have 500 people in a room, and you poison gas is released in the room. You know people are going to die. What do? You try to get as many out as possible, even if you understand that some might die or some will die. Your your task is to get as many out as you possibly can. But in the back of your mind, there's already the knowledge that some are going to die. And maybe you don't even have control over who will die, but you are trying to save as many as you can. And the situation in the world is something like this. The moment sin came into the planet, it was beyond question. Many are going to die. And sometimes, in order to save others, you yourself or God Himself might have to take the life of some. This is a fact of the sin environment that God could not stop. As we all know, there's one scenario in which God could have prevented anybody from dying. There's one scenario, and it is this: God would have had to take away freedom from everybody. Nobody is free to choose. I am going to determine that nobody can rebel, nobody can sin. I'm going to turn you all into robots.
Brother David.
Nobody can ever take the wrong decision. Nobody can ever die. God could have done this, right? And I'll tell you, I'm not pretending to be able to think like God, but I've used this illustration before, and I can tell you, I think we can all understand it, right? Those of us who are married, there's something special in your relationship because your husband or your wife was able to choose somebody else. That's what makes a wife or a husband special. That's why you have this special bond with this person and you want this person to be in your life forever because this person had the choice of other people and the person chose you. If the person could not choose, that's why I find some of these arranged marriages like you have in certain cultures, right? You don't have a choice who you choose. Your parents choose for you and you just come together because your parents think it's the right person. You just come and you get married to this stranger. That it seems to work, but it's not a good love story. It's not based on love and freedom of choice. And somehow we who have freedom and who cherish freedom, we feel a little uncomfortable with that kind of situation because inherent in relationships, inherent in relationships is a freedom to choose. And so when your wife chose you, when your is brother Marlon, take the phone from me. When your wife chose you or you chose her, it was because you had the freedom to choose. And so you give me a robot, you give me a yes lady. She never says anything but yes. She never argues. She's like a puppet in my hands. I could not enjoy that relationship. I might enjoy the physical part of it, but there'll be no meeting of minds. And so after a while you would get tired of this relationship. It's like you're dealing with a prostitute. So it's unthinkable that God, who is the creator of all things, could have made a system where everybody was just a robot. He had to make us free. Otherwise, he might as well not have made the universe. But he made us free. And having made us free, there was the possibility of sin. There was always the possibility of sin. And so from the beginning, from the time that God decided to create free will, God faced what was likely to happen. He knew that in order for him to make creatures that were free, there was the possibility of great great disaster, the loss of life and everything. But what is the alternative? God could have said, well, I'm going to live alone in the universe forever because I dare not create free will, because if I create free will, it might turn out the wrong way. So what? Live alone forever. The way I look at it is like this. I had 4 children. I have 4 children, and before they were born, I knew they were going to give me trouble. How did I know? Because my parents had 10 of us, and I know what happened. I know that even today, there are some members of my brothers and sisters that I'm afraid they might be lost forever. They're not Christians. I'm afraid. It's the risk you take when you bring life. I just had a grandson born 1 week now, and nobody knows what will become of this little boy. We all pray and we hope and we are going to fight to see him in the kingdom, but we don't know. He might turn the other way. Who knows? But his parents still feel it is worth having a child. It is worth bringing forth somebody in my image and to take the risk that he might be lost, because that is not what we plan for and that is not what we hope for. And this is what God did. God saw what might happen. He even saw what would happen, and he thought it was worth it. I like how the Bible talks about Jesus. It says, "For the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross." And that is how it is with when we bring forth somebody in our image. It's the joy, the potential for joy is worth the possibility of the loss. And I'm saying this because what I want to highlight is that this is how it was with God. So God created freedom, and when he created freedom, he created danger. And so this planet is let's say it's a laboratory. I don't like to put it that way, like God created it as an experiment. He didn't do that. But it became a laboratory, because when sin invaded the planet, God isolated sin to this planet. He stopped Satan from being able to travel outside of the environs of this planet, so that sin could play out. Sin could play out. The fullness of sin could be revealed on this planet, so that when it is done, nobody will ever use their free will in the wrong way anymore. The questions have been answered. Sin is finished. Nobody will ever use it the wrong way anymore. What I'm really saying in all of this is that in this process, God knew that some would have to die. In this process, God knew that he himself would find it necessary to remove life in order to save life. And if I can even give you a more graphic description, 10 of us are marooned on an island. You find that one person has an incurable disease. We don't know the end from the beginning, so we can't say incurable. But I'm kind of pretending here that we have God's knowledge. You know that somebody has a highly infectious disease, and you know that this person, the disease affects his mind, so that he is going to do his best to kill everybody else. It dements his mind. He's going to try to kill everybody else. Now, in a human setting, it's kind of hard to give us the right kind of example, because you will say, well, we could catch him and tie him up, or we could lock him in a cage, and all of that is possible. But I'm just assuming now that there are no other options. In this case, it is better for the one person to die, that everybody else might be saved. In this case, and we know it is so because this is what God did for us with Jesus. But even in other cases, like when God destroyed the world by a flood, and when God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, many times people look upon it and they say it was judgment. But I don't like to use the word judgment, because I don't think it was judgment so much, because those people are going to come back to face judgment. So they have not yet faced judgment. What it was preservation. God wanted to preserve the world so that the knowledge of God and the knowledge of the right way could have a chance of growing and developing. And so, in order that wickedness should not completely overwhelm the world, from time to time, God had to do a certain purging. So certain times when people died, it was more purging. It was not judgment, if you understand what I mean. Because judgment really means that you bring somebody before the judge, you accuse him of a crime, he's found guilty, and then you sentence him. That is judgment. But more or less, it was not judgment. It was a matter of saving people from a deadly disease. Somebody has Ebola. You lock him up. You keep him away from other people. Is that judgment? No, it's not judgment. It's preservation. Somebody has a deadly infectious disease, and you want to safeguard everybody. You lock him up. Why? He has committed a crime. Why are you locking me in prison? Why are you putting me in this place? It's not about judgment. It's about preservation of the others. There's a story, there's a case in the Bible that makes this very clear, right? This man gets up this morning. He kisses his wife and he kisses his children, and he's very happy. And they notice that there is a red mark on his forehead or on his hand or somewhere, a red mark or a whitish mark or a red mark, whatever. You go to Leviticus and you can read about it. And he decides to go to the priest, who's kind of like the doctor. And God says the priest is to look at this thing on his skin and he's to lock him up for 7 days. Lock him up for what? He didn't do anything wrong. All he did was have a mark on his hand or in his forehead. Lock him up for 7 days. He's not to go back home. He's not to say goodbye to his wife or children. Lock him up. After 7 days, the priest is to look at him again. And if the red mark has turned white, what is to happen? He's not to go back to his family. He's not to go back to his children. He's to leave the camp of Israel and he's never to come back. He's not to go and say goodbye to his family or anything. He's to cover his head with ashes, or he's to wander in the wilderness and he's to stay outside. And anytime he sees anybody, he's to cry, unclean, unclean. What a deathly sentence. What a terrible thing. I was reading it one day and I was devastated. Never see your family again. You are to live like a wild beast. Why? It seems so hard and cruel, and yet it was for the good and the safety of the others. What God was doing was quarantining this person. The Jews came to see it as the judgment of God. They saw leprosy as a judgment from God. And they saw the leper as somebody who was in the throes of sin, somebody who was under God's curse. All that happened was that the poor person had a disease. And God wanted to safeguard the rest of people. So God said, put him away. But God never told them the details. God just says, do X, do Y, do Z. Because they were primitive people who were incapable of understanding certain things. God just told them, do this. And he never explained why. But I mean, we can look and we can see the principle of what I'm saying. Even in this situation, we see God's principle of trying to safeguard others by putting a harsh sentence on the individual. It appears to be harsh, and yet it is necessary. And I'm saying really that this is why God has to take life sometimes. God has to kill sometimes, because it is, you know, many times I believe that I'm not meaning disrespect for the ladies, so please understand. Ladies tend to have a more tender heart. When a man develops certain tendencies, you refer to the man as being effeminate. And in other words, it's natural, right? A lady is made tender. God made her that way. You have to be tender to raise a child on your bosom, and a lady is closer to her children and she's more sympathetic than a man. And I think this is one of the reasons why God ordained that men should have certain rules and women certain rules, because certain kinds of things need a different kind of personality, a different kind of emotion. But one of the things I see in the world today is that in many places a spirit of effeminism is taking over the planet. It may be contradictory, because you have in some places viciousness and cruelty, but in some things, like for example, they say, how can you hit a child? Whereas in the Bible, it's quite natural that sometimes you have to punish a child and sometimes you even have to hit the child. People overdo it, but they have gone to another extreme where if you even speak hard to a child, you can end up in prison in some places. But what I'm saying is that there is a mood or a spirit that seems to be taking over the world where the strength to do what is right is being eliminated in favor of emotionalism. And what I say this because I think that in this question, does God kill? I think there is an effeminate perspective. I use the word carefully, but I think I use it correctly. There is an effeminate spirit where they are saying that God is so good, he cannot hurt something. They think that being good means you cannot hurt. And I believe this is making God effeminate. I believe that it is saying that goodness means being impotent in terms of doing what is necessary. And I believe that Of course, not I believe. The Bible makes it clear that you have to reject a great deal of biblical evidence in order to come to this conclusion. Now I'm going to go to the Bible. I'm going to bring up the Bible on the screen, and I'm going to actually look at some additional biblical ideas in relation to this. Last week I touched on the idea that there are words that are used. There are words that are used that give you a wrong idea, and they are always used whenever people talk about this subject. They use these kinds of words. They say, I have a friend and he says, my God is not a killer. What he's saying is that my God is a killer because I believe that God kills. He labels my God as a killer. And you know the implication of the word killer. It's not a good word. The way we use the word killer, it means somebody who is vicious and harsh, who arbitrarily takes people's lives. And so he says, my God is not a killer. The truth is, in terms of what the word killer means or implies, my God is not a killer either. But it doesn't mean that my God does not kill if it's necessary. But you have words that are used that are emotional like this. And then they will focus on words like, God says, vengeance is mine. And then you focus on what is vengeance. Vengeance is an act of retribution where you hurt somebody because the person has hurt you. There is nothing good in vengeance, because all that vengeance is me satisfying my feelings of anger, my feelings of rage, my feelings of hurt. You hurt me, I'm going to make sure you hurt in return. It does not help anybody. And if you say that God is a God of vengeance and you don't understand what is behind the word, if you think that God is like this, then you will have the wrong idea of God's character. It's particularly in the Old Testament, particularly, not only, but particularly in the Old Testament, you find these ideas about judgment and retribution and vengeance, because and because of how we understand these words, this is what causes a problem. Let me use a practical example to highlight what I mean. Some of you might have heard me use this example before. I'm going to use it again. It's something that really happened. I was watching TV one day, and I was watching this documentary where they were hunting for war criminals. And this reporter was down in Argentina. They say a lot of the criminals from the Nazis in World War II, they ended up in Argentina. They escaped by way of the Vatican and they ended up in Argentina. And you know that there was a certain point where the US and some other countries were actively hunting for these people. And this reporter, he found one of them in Argentina who apparently was one of those agents of one of these killers, killers from the Nazis. But this man was responsible for the death of many people. So the man found him and, he was interviewing him. He was an old man by this time. It was what, from the 1940s. So this was about in the 1980s that I was watching this thing. So it was over 40 years ago. He was an old man. He had settled down in Argentina, had a wife, had a family, was a respectable member of the community, and I think he had become a Christian. I don't want to put that in, and I'm not sure, but I think so. And this reporter said to him, "Why did you do what you did?" He said, I was a young man. I was just obeying orders. I was foolish. I was young and I was foolish. I was obeying orders." And the reporter asked him, "And you think because you were young, you think that this excuses you from having to pay the penalty?" And the man said, "What do you want me to do? What can I do? It's in my past. I did it. I was wrong. I recognize this. I can't change the past." The reporter insisted, "What do you think should be done to you now?" The man shook his head and he said, "You don't understand," and he walked away. The reporter was so dead set on the authorities coming and taking this man and locking him up. And I was watching it and I was filled with contending emotions because I was young at the time. I was a young Christian, but at the same time, I look at this man and I'm thinking, what is the point of locking up this man, this old man at 90? How many in his 80s? How many people is he going to put to death now? How many people is he going to hurt at this age? Especially when he has repented of what he did and he's sorry for it. Who is it going to help to take this old man and lock him up now? Something named justice says, do it. But in my heart, I felt, my goodness, it's not going to help the man. It's not going to help the people he killed. The man has changed. He has repented. Why lock him up? The world has a concept of justice that says he must pay. For whose sake? For the sake of something called justice, some mindless principle that says eye for eye, tooth for tooth. If it's going to help somebody, fine. If it's going to help nobody, why not just forgive the man and thank God that he came to recognize the folly of his ways? Because that is not the way. That is not the way of justice in this world. And when you think that God's justice is like this, of course you have to rethink. Does God just take vengeance on a person because of what the person did in the past? Or is God's justice, is God's judgment restorative? Is God looking to redeem and to restore, or to take vengeance? Now, I'm not going to pursue this line of reasoning too much. I just want I just want us to get an idea of what I'm trying to say. It will take a whole day if we want to go into this in detail, but I just hope you're getting an idea of what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say that one of the most important things is the motive and the reason why we do things. If you inflict punishment on a person, the real question is, what is your motive? What is your reason? Why do you do this? God's motive is always, there are about two motives. Number one, if he can restore the person. If you can restore the person, beat him. If you can restore the person, lock him up, teach him, rehabilitate him. Whatever you can do to make a person turn around, do it by all means. If you cannot rehabilitate the person, you cannot turn him around, and the person is at a place where he's a danger to himself and to other people, then there's justification in taking his life. And that is how God operates. Restoration or purging. That's how God operates. It's not the question of God cannot kill, God cannot hurt, so God has to sit back and allow every evil to grow and multiply. No. God created man. God created everything. He has the right to intervene and to put a stop to things. As a matter of fact, in Isaiah 45 and verse 7, there's a verse here that people ask about all the time. And I'll just bring it in at this point because it can shed some, it can enhance what I'm trying to say. The verse says, I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. Many times people come to this verse and they ask me, or they try to say, God created evil. God created good and God created evil. So God is to blame for sin. Some strange ideas people come up with. But the verse does say that God creates evil. Let me see how it is worded in the NASB. In the NASB, look at what it says. It's a little different. The one forming light and creating darkness, causing well-being and creating calamity. Instead of saying creating evil, it says God creates calamity. And I agree wholeheartedly with the NASB. What it is saying is not that God created evil in the essence of what evil means. It means that God can cause good to come upon a city, or he can cause calamity to come upon a city. It means that God could have preserved Israel from their enemies that wanted to invade them, or God could have removed his barrier of protection and caused the Assyrians or the Babylonians to come in and to create calamity. It means that God is sovereign and he's in charge. God does not create evil in the sense that God actually puts the principle of evil in nature. As we understand, I suppose, let me say this. I suppose at the beginning, God created the universe to work in a certain way. Notice that God says, I form the light and I create darkness. I know that darkness is not something you create. I know that darkness is when you take away light. Based on what we can understand from observation and from even science itself, darkness is nothing. It has no atoms, no photons, no principle. It is just nothing. Our eyes were made in such a way that we cannot see nothing. Our reality was created in such a way that nothing cannot be seen or touched or felt or interacted with. Nothing is just nothing. That's a part of the reality in which we live. Nothing means absence of everything. So, did God create absence of everything? Or was there absence of everything before God started to create? Kind of funny questions, but what I'm saying is, what I understand is that God made nothingness, He made darkness possible when He created light. So when there was light, then the rest of it was called darkness. God didn't have to create darkness, but He created a situation in which when light came into being, absence of light was called darkness. And I think it's the same thing with good and evil. God created good, and good means nothing unless there is evil. Evil is simply when goodness is taken away. What remains? It's evil. It's none good. So, in this sense, you could say that God created evil because when He created good, He created the concept of evil as well. Something that is not good has to be evil. So, God is the one in this sense who creates everything, and therefore, over and over in the Bible, God is credited with causing evil. For example, when Job's wife accused him and said, "Why don't you curse God and die? Can't you see that God has abandoned you?" Job said, "Shall we not receive, we have received good from the hand of the Lord. Shall we not receive evil as well?" He credited God with causing the evil on him. But what we can see is that what God did, he took away the good out of the way, He removed His protection, and so the evil came in. And yet God says He took responsibility for it. So God operates in this way, as we said last week. God does operate in this way. Sometimes He simply removes His protection and the evil comes in. But this does not negate the fact that it happens, that it sometimes happens this way. But there are other times when God Himself deliberately brings death upon a person. But I just wanted to make that point because this is one of the things that people will say, that God takes the credit for what He allows, and it is true. I just want us to see it is true because God can stop it and He doesn't. So in this sense, He's responsible. So it's more than one way in which we can say that God actually takes life or God actually kills. Now, the next thing I want to point out is that we have to make a difference also between two things. We have what is called the first death, which is a sleep, and we have what is called the second death, which is a state of death from which a person can never come back. So, which of these does God do? Or does God do both of them? Now, it's very clear, it's beyond controversy that God does put people to sleep. And I'll show you one striking example. We mentioned it in the Bible last week. I want to repeat it because I want to reinforce the idea. In Deuteronomy 34, verses 5 to 7, it says, "So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And He, that is God, buried him in a valley in the land of Moab over against Beth Peor. But no man knoweth of his sepulchre unto this day." Nobody knows where Moses is buried, and yet he was buried. Who buried him? Not a man. Clearly not a man. Moses died, and God buried him, and nobody knew where he was buried. The only thing we can know about Moses' death is what inspiration tells us. But look what it says. I repeat, Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was not dim, nor his natural force abated. I wish I could be like that. Anyway, Moses went up on the mountain with God 40 days, came down, broke the two tablets of stone, started making the golden calf, went up back for 40 more days. I like to put it this way, that God rubbed off on Moses. The presence of God rubbed off on Moses. He was almost becoming immortal while in the flesh, because when he got to 120, his natural force was not abated. I am 68, and I am exercising. I'm trying to maintain my strength, but I know it's an uphill battle. I know I'm fighting uphill because I can't manage the weights that I used to manage 10 years ago. And I can't jog as far anymore. I'm tending to get some muscle contract. My body is going down. It happens to everybody. Once you pass 40, you start heading in the other direction. But Moses was 120. His natural force was not abated. The word abate means to begin to diminish. His eye was not dim. I'm 68. I'm wearing glasses. Last night I was talking to my uncle. He's 98 and he's blind. My mother died at 96 and she was blind. You start to lose your faculties. Moses' eye was not dim. He did not die. Moses did not die of old age. Who killed Moses? If we are honest people, it's very clear. God killed Moses. God put Moses to death. Moses should have gone into the promised land. Moses disobeyed God, dishonored God, and God says, because of this, you're not going to be allowed to go into the promised land. Moses said, please let me go over and see this good land and Lebanon. God says, don't speak to me about this anymore. You will have to die. God put Moses to sleep. There's nothing immoral about putting a person to sleep. When Paul died in prison, when they chopped off his head, what did Paul say? The time of my departure is at hand. I am fully ready to be offered. He was not dying. He was going to sleep. How could there be anything morally wrong in God putting a person to sleep? He allowed so many of his children to die the death of a martyr. He never intervened to save their lives. He sent the angel to prison and he released Peter. In the case of Paul, he never released him. In the case of John the Baptist, he never released them. They died in prison. Was he unfair? Was he unjust? Why then release Peter? It shows that sleep is not anything. We ourselves are not afraid to sleep. And if God should put me to sleep, I would not complain, because we know this is not life. This is not real life. This is just a passing, transient period, and true life is to come in the future. So nobody could suggest reasonably that it is immoral for God to put a person to sleep. But this brings up the question then of the final destruction. What about the final destruction? Is it God who finally destroys the wicked? And is it immoral for God to destroy people ultimately, to impose the second death, the last death upon people? Just a few verses. My time is running out rapidly, so let me just read a few verses. In Matthew 10 and verse 28, here are the words of Jesus. People who embrace this belief, typically they will point to Jesus and they will say, Jesus never killed anybody. And Jesus is the perfect representation of God. This is true. But did Jesus show you everything about God when he was here on earth? He showed you the love of God. He showed the mercy of God. He showed the attitude of God. But did he show everything that God can do? No, I don't think so. Did Jesus create any worlds while he was here? No. In other words, what we see is that Jesus came to show God's character from one perspective. If Jesus had killed anybody, like who would he have killed? Who deserved to die? Maybe Judas, all right? Maybe Judas. If Jesus had taken one life, there would have been justification for the Romans to crucify him. He never came here. He never came here to be judge. He came here to be savior. But the Bible teaches us that he's coming back another time as judge, not as savior. So we have to consider the two different roles of Christ. When he came the first time, he came to save. When he comes the second time, he comes to separate the sheep from the goats and to execute judgment. These are two different aspects of the same character. Hear what he says in Matthew 10 and verse 28. Fear not them which kill the body, but are unable to kill the soul, but rather fear him which is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Is he speaking here of Satan? Is he saying, be afraid of Satan, because Satan can destroy your body and your soul in hell? Ridiculous. Satan himself is to be destroyed in hell or in the fires of the last day. So Jesus is not saying to be afraid of Satan or to respect Satan. The person who is able to destroy soul and body is God, not Satan. The only person who is capable of destroying the spirit or the entire soul, the entire being, is God. Nobody else. So Jesus says, don't be afraid of the policeman or the criminal or the tyrant, those who would burn you alive or shoot you in the head. Don't be afraid. All they do is kill your body. They put you to sleep for a while. But nobody can destroy your soul except God. God is the one that you should respect and fear, honor, because he has that power. In other words, you should respond to God. You should be obedient to God, because God is the one who holds your destiny ultimately. This is the very clear teaching of Jesus, that God is able and that God will eventually put people permanently to death. This is talking about the second death, the last moment of destruction, not sleep, but complete destruction. If you look at Matthew 25 again, Matthew 25 and in verse 41, when he talks about the parable of the sheep and the goats, he says in verse 41, then shall he say also unto them on the left hand, depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. Now, of course, we understand this everlasting fire. We have discussed it in our Revelation studies. But look at what he says. He says, this fire is prepared for the devil and his angels. In other words, God has made provision for Satan and for those original rebels, the angels, to be destroyed. And in the process of their destruction, people are going to die along with them. They're going to die in a fire that was never intended for us. It was intended for Satan and his angels. But people are going to be destroyed in that fire as well. And Jesus says it was prepared. So you ask, who prepared that fire? There is a verse in Ezekiel. In Ezekiel, where is it? I thought I had it here. Yeah, Ezekiel 28, where it suggests something here that our brothers and sisters in that movement, they like to hold on to it. It says in Ezekiel 28 and verse 18, speaking of the angel Lucifer, the one that walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire, the one in whom iniquity was found. Therefore will I bring forth a fire from the midst of thee. It shall devour thee, and I will bring thee to ashes upon the earth in the sight of all them that behold thee. And what these brethren say is that, look at the verse. It says that a fire is going to come out of Satan. A fire is going to come out of Satan and destroy him. And they say this is a fire that is going to spread all over the world and destroy the wicked. They say Satan himself has a furnace burning inside of him, and this fire is going to break out of Satan and destroy everybody. So what they are saying is that it is not God who will send a fire to destroy the wicked, but the fire will come from out of Satan. If I am honest with you, brothers and sisters, I don't like to sound mocking or insultive to other people. I don't want to, but in my opinion, this is such an amazing stretch of the imagination, because what it is saying is that Satan has inside of him chemicals that are so combustible. At one point, God is going to cause these chemicals to burst out, to explode and destroy Satan from inside Satan. And inside of Satan, there are chemicals of such a terrific nature that they will have the potential greater than 1,000 hydrogen bombs to destroy the whole world. If that makes sense to you, you have a stronger imagination than me. That's all I will say. But it doesn't make sense to me. And if it makes sense to you, what it would mean is that God created this inside of Lucifer. So God created in Satan this destructive force. So how can you say that God does not destroy? Anyway, in my opinion, it's a silly idea, right? There are other verses in the Bible that put it another way. For example, in Revelation 20 and verse 9, it says, they went up on the breadth of the earth and compassed the camp of the saints about, and the beloved city. And fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. There the Bible says it in a far more reasonable way. Fire comes down from where it comes down from God. It comes from heaven and it destroys the wicked. Now, immediately following, it says, and the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone. So at this point, the question is often asked, which of these is true? It says fire comes down and destroys them. And then it says in the next verse that Satan is cast into the lake of fire. And a little further down, it says, whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. So the question is asked, which is it? Are they thrown into the lake of fire, or is it that fire comes down and devours them? The Bible says two different things in just two verses. But of course, the solution, the answer is very simple. What it is that the lake of fire is not a place. And I think we have looked at this before. The lake of fire is not a place. It tells you clearly in verse 24, is it? No, in verse 14. Verse 14. It says, and death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. In other words, the phrase, the lake of fire, is a coded phrase. It's a coded phrase. Like everything else in Revelation, like so many things in Revelation, there is a phrase that is used and it's a code for something else. When you see lake of fire, do not think of a lake. Do not think of fire. Think of the complete idea. Lake of fire simply means eternal death. That's what the phrase means. Whenever anybody is dead forever, God says he's in the lake of fire. So the key to understanding this is when you look at this same verse 14, it says, death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. So you ask, what is death? Is death a person? Is death a thing? Is death a substance? How do you throw death into a lake that is burning with fire? What is death? That is not something. That is the absence of life. How do you throw the absence of life into a burning lake? What does it mean when it says death is thrown into the lake? It simply means death ceases to exist. Death is gone forever. Whenever something is gone forever, where is it? It's in the lake of fire. Which lake? There's no lake. It's simply a coded phrase, and it means it ceases to exist. So you could read this phrase, and death ceased to exist, and hell ceased to exist. That's what it means. So now we see the harmony between verses 9 and 10. Fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them, and the devil that deceived them ceased to exist. Just as the beast and the false prophet ceased to exist, and the consequences of what they suffered goes on forever and ever. They cease to exist, they never come back. That is what the lake of fire means. So there's no contradiction. Fire comes down from God out of heaven and devours Satan, and he ceases to exist. And whosoever was not found written in the book of life ceased to exist. They suffer what Jesus says. God has destroyed both body and soul, body and spirit. They have been completely wiped out of existence. They no longer exist. It's the best thing that a merciful God can do to people who have chosen the way of sin. The best thing is not to allow them to live forever, is not to leave them to the mercy of Satan, it's not to leave them to be tortured by his enemy. It's to wipe them out of existence where suffering is over forever. The final point I will make, my time is up, but the final point I will make is that these people, just to emphasize the point, that these people do not die in a natural way. God is involved, because you ask the question, who raises them to life? The Bible teaches you in many places that there is a resurrection. These people who died as sinners, if God is not going to actually take their lives, why bring them back to life? Why bring them back to life? They are dead, they are sleeping, they died naturally. If that is what is going to happen to them, why bring them back to life? But the Bible tells you clearly, Jesus says to those who crucified him, after this, you shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven. In Daniel chapter 12 and verse 3, it says, many of those that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. Over and over. Here in Revelation 20, it says in verses 4 and 5, and I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus and for the word of God, which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads or in their hands. And they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. But the rest of the dead lived not again until the 1,000 years were finished. Referring to those who had not received the mark of the beast, this is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he that hath part in the first resurrection. On such the second death has no power. But there is a second resurrection. And these who get up in the second resurrection, the second death has power over them. The second death has power over them. They are raised from the dead to face the second death. They are raised from the dead to die again. This time to die permanently. This time to die at the hands of the one who is able to destroy both body and soul in hell. Anyway, my time is up. I know I rambled around a little bit, but it's a topic that I felt like we need to really emphasize and get the concepts, even if not the details, to get the concepts clear, because there's so much misconception and misunderstanding out there, and because the message of God's love and righteousness is a central truth, but we want to make sure that that truth is not perverted or distorted. Thank you all for your participation.
Brother David.
Yes, Brother Cliff, go ahead.
So, based on this very thorough story, thank you for it. Then the definition of kill is not correct, because we hear all the time, this person killed this person, that person killed the other person. That definition is not correct, because if you look in the dictionary, it says to put to death someone else or another life. You cannot, nobody on this earth, as according to your study, can kill someone, meaning cause their death. So what shall we say then? Because the actual truth of what someone else is doing with a gun is that you're putting me to sleep permanently till Jesus comes. Go ahead and do it, that kind of stuff. So how should we understand this now?
The thing is that, we use the terminology that helps us to understand as we communicate with each other. So the word kill, I suppose what you could say is that the true meaning of kill is as the Bible defines it. But in everyday communication, we don't focus on the Bible definition. So when you say this person killed this person, what is important in common communication is that you understand what I mean. But I would say that, yeah, in agreement with you, when we are discussing biblical issues, it's better if we use biblical terminology. In support of this, when I was in college, I remember my Christian friends, Christian batchmates, we had a little grouped together. We always refer to each other as saints, and that's a biblical idea. And if you and we Christians tend to say, you know, Sister Jones is sleeping, like Jesus said of Lazarus, Lazarus is sleeping. But as you can see, his disciples didn't understand him. So sometimes there is a difficulty when we start to use biblical terminology because we are communicating with non-biblical people. So I understand what you're saying, but I suppose in the interest of easy communication, we have to be very specific about how we use the biblical terminology.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Thank you.
All right, Brother Clay.
I have a question.
Yes, Sister Margaret, go ahead.
It's two questions. Pertaining to God, is he the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow? He never changed? Is that true?
Absolutely, but I would make a little caveat. God never
But,
changes, but his method of operation changes in different periods. Not that he changes, but that he chooses to manifest one aspect of his character here, and then he shows something else in another period. But he has not changed.
okay, because I was just made that statement because I was going back to Genesis 38 about the Judah and Tamar's son who lived evil, and God took his life, and he took his brother's life because he went against the family and the heir of the child. So I can understand what you're saying, that he doesn't change, and that he changes in situations and times. So
Yes,
that's the Old Testament.
yes. Thank you, Sister Margaret. Yes,
I have another question.
yes. Go ahead.
Can I take another question?
Sure, go ahead.
Um, Revelations 20. Uh, is it true that our names are all in the book of life? And what time do we come out of the book of life? And it says recorded. So recorded and put in. Is that two different things happening there?
To be honest, this is a subject that I believe I need to study more. But here is my understanding at the moment, which I grant you is not based on a thorough study of the book of life. But what I believe, what I seem to see, I've heard this said, and it seems to make sense to me that everybody's name is in the book of life, but names are going to be blotted out if we don't respond to Christ. So I think you will find in the Bible where names are removed from the book of life, but you will never find where names are added to the book of life.
Right.
So that's my superficial understanding. I'm not going to swear by this understanding because I've not studied it properly, but that's what I would say.
Okay. Well, I understand it's a hard question because no one knows, I guess, when our name come out.
It's I believe it's when we reject the Lord, when our what is called our probation is closed, then our names are removed.
Uh-huh. Okay.
It wouldn't be before that.
Okay. I'll study it a little more. Thank you.
I will too, Sister Margaret. All right, thank you for the questions. I'm going to close at this point. I'm over time. I don't see Brother Howard, but I suppose he's somewhere there. So let's just give thanks as we bow our heads.